Titan. And it speaks to not just his skin color, but also just in terms of a certain luster about him, a certain radiance that he gave off. And he was adored and reviled equally by, you either loved him or you hated him. The folks who loved him were folks who respected him as a person, and the folks who hated him were folks that the hate was rooted in fear. To give you an example, Pablo Picasso, as a little boy growing up in Spain, when the little boys in his community would play war games, all the little Spanish boys wanted to they all wanted to assume the role of Antonio Maceo. The same way little boys and girls now playing basketball say, "I'll be LeBron, no, I'm LeBron, I'm LeBron." They were saying that of Antonio Maceo. Little Spanish boys and girls, we're talking about. It's akin to little boys and girls in the United States wanted to pretend to be Ho Chi Minh during the 60s.
The most famous person within their cultural sphere. So you're saying in the 19th century, Antonio Maceo was a well-known, celebrated, also reviled, but just popular figure. People knew about him across the Atlantic Ocean.
But reviled because he was...
Of his success.
Because of his success. He was greatly feared by the Spanish, and not just within Cuba and its enemies in Spain, as Cuba was trying to free itself from Spain. But when news of his death came to the Italian Parliament in Rome, they held a moment of silence in homage to him. Obituaries in his honor were written on the occasion of his death in diverse languages, including in Yiddish.
Wow. So, I mean, even the Pope knew about this guy. Can you tell us a little bit about his background? I mean, why would the Pope take notice, and why would people remember him in Yiddish? It sort of speaks to an even, greater legacy or impact globally.
Well, Antonio Maceo is, in the promotion that we've been doing for this event, we've been describing him as a genuine West Indian hero, a Caribbean hero.
Okay.
Because Antonio Maceo was born in Cuba, he fought for Cuban independence, but there's documented evidence that he was interested in Puerto Rican independence. He was also interested in the creation of a Grand Republic of the Caribbean, anchored by Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. He spent a great deal of time in exile in between wars of independence in Jamaica. His mother died in Jamaica.
Wow.
He was very well known and very popular in Haiti and the Dominican Republic and the Bahamas.
And raised troops, I believe, in Costa Rica.
Costa Rica, Honduras. Spent time in Panama. He was somebody who had very humble origins, essentially a middle-class background. His father was a retired soldier, and he became a small landowner, and a large number of children, mostly boys, the Maceo men, if you will, and almost all of them died fighting for Cuba's independence. He basically started the outbreak of the first official War of Independence in 1868 as somebody in his late teens, as a buck private, and within months had ascended to the rank of a high-ranking officer, purely based on merit. Because again, we're talking about this was a young man of color, of some education,
humble origins.
Yeah, very humble. He wasn't aristocratic at all.
Today, the euphemism is from the bottom to the top, and this is a 19th century patriot or American who sort of fulfilled that motif.
Absolutely.
And let me just interject here, because as a student of history, I mean, many people know this is doing a radio show. I'm also somewhat of a historian. I got a DVD just out, Resurrecting Black Wall Street, speaking about the Tulsa episode of 1920s.
Greenwood,
about the Greenwood Massacre. But in this case, Antonio Maceo, man, it's a name that, based on your description, I think deserves a lot more in terms of just resonance. And not just resonance nationally, but especially in a community like South Florida. And you're saying here that he may not be as resonant because of his skin color? Yeah. Because that kind of speaks to some of what maybe some of the ongoing social issues between groups are here in Miami today.
Well, I mean, it's ongoing, I think is a good way of describing it, because we're not talking about anything that's new to Miami. There's been a lot of polarity in Miami.
Tensions between blacks and Cubans?
Yeah, I mean, it was specifically, and it just kind of, it shifts, it's very fluid. I mean, born and raised in Miami, it's not just African Americans and Cubans, it might be between this ethnic group and another group.
Asians, might be Jamaicans.
It might be within certain groups, even within the Cuban community. There might be some division between the Cubans who came over in this year versus in that year, and so on. So
it's part of the milieu then of South Florida political turmoil and points of contention, issues.
Greater Miami is a very polarized place. Now, it's not to say it's also polarized in the sense that not everything is polarized. There's a lot of harmony. a lot of folks that interact quite harmonically here in South Florida, which is one of the challenges. And I think one of the things that we've been trying to put all of the promotion and encouragement about this event, where we made the decision to go ahead and describe it as a West Indian event because this is Caribbean American Heritage Month, number one. And we didn't want this to be just a Cuban event, because Antonio Maceo is important outside of Cuba, and we wanted people to feel welcome in it. For example, in Clarendon, Jamaica, there's a school named after Marcus Garvey and Antonio Maceo.
Antonio Maceo.
In Kingston, in Monument Park, where they have wonderful monuments to Jamaica's many national heroes, there's a bust of Antonio Maceo.
Wow.
There's a significance for Antonio Maceo, and even within African American circles.
That's right.
If you look at, a lot of jazz is played here on the show, and older jazz heads are familiar with Maceo Parker.
That's right.
Maceo Parker is one of many African Americans named after the Bronze Titan, because when Antonio Maceo rose to prominence and started gathering accolades, all of them deserved, this was at the time of Reconstruction, at the onset of Jim Crow and a certain racial caste system, to borrow from Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. As that was being entrenched in a new manifestation, African Americans who were looking for strong role models looked to the headlines.
They heard about the story of Antonio Maceo down in Cuba and throughout the Americas. I mean, his name rang bells
Absolutely.
at the turn of the last century.
In
fact, I know Eric Foner in the 1970s wrote what is considered to be the definitive biography on Antonio Maceo. And before that, the only other tome that dedicated to this leading founding father almost of the Americas was Arturo Schomburg, another Afro-Latin figure who was major in Harlem and major in the Harlem Renaissance, one of the fathers of the Harlem Renaissance. He wrote a biography of Antonio Maceo as well.
But I think the thing that helped with Schomburg was the fact that Schomburg was essentially alive not too long. Basically, their lives
he was
intersected.
almost a contemporary.
Almost. Had Antonio Maceo not died in combat after the conclusion of one of the great military endeavors of modern time, the invasion of Western Cuba, which is a whole other conversation. They probably would have certainly interacted. Arturo Schomburg, being Puerto Rican also, the fact that Schomburg was incredibly curious about history and insatiable in trying to get down to the bottom of it.
Oh, he may be America's premier bibliophile in terms of collector of books and propagating history as something to be studied.
Absolutely.
He's a foundational character.
Absolutely.
He doesn't get enough credit in my opinion.
No. I mean, it's a lot of credit has to be given to Arturo Schomburg, and thankfully his name carries resonance in academic and even social circles here in the United States, thanks in no small part to the Schomburg Center in New York.
That's right.
But certainly Schomburg, Eric Foner's book, which is the only book in English that exists on Antonio Maceo.
Folks may not know, but Eric Foner is considered one of the 20th century's most important historians. And for him to take some of his academic life to spend on Antonio Maceo spoke volumes. And he wrote the book in the 70s.
1977 when the book was published.
So that's still, I still don't understand then why the name Antonio Maceo, almost, to me at least, maybe my perception is wrong, appears to be like one of these lost historical figures in terms of impact. I mean, for instance, I just saw on Netflix a biography of Simón Bolívar, worthy of a biography. I mean, Simón Bolívar is a premier patriotic figure for the Americas, right? Defined Latin America, South America as American as anywhere else. Practiced all the virtues of patriotism. And, we know about Fidel Castro. We're seeing, we're in an era where film is tackling what went on in the Dominican Republic in terms of revolution. Nobody is tackling Maceo. And then you're saying here in this Miami neighborhood, there's a statue but no nameplate. I'm pretty sure if I went and asked if I just asked 10 random people on Miami streets who may or may not be of Cuban heritage, if they knew who Antonio Maceo was, I'm shocked that folks would even know.
Wait, let me give you an example to illustrate this. On a Saturday or Sunday morning, when I was by there, and I was,
And what's the location again?
This is at the intersection of Southwest 10th Street and Southwest 13th Avenue, just off of A Street, off of the.
And that's where the event this weekend will be.
That's exactly what's going to be on Sunday evening.
All right.
As I'm seeing a couple out there, and turns out they're from Texas, and I asked them if they know who this bust is dedicated to. They said they do not. Would you like to know who it is? Sure, we'd like to. As we're going over the history, a lot of the conversation that we're having now, I see, and they're having difficulty wrapping their mind around, but why would him being black make a difference? And as we're talking, a little old lady, maybe in the 60s, 70s, kind of shuffles on by with a little plastic shopping bag full of her groceries.
Yeah.
And I asked her in Spanish, "Pardon, ma'am, are you Cuban?" She says, "Yes, I am." "Where in Cuba are you from?" "I'm from Havana." Okay. So I said, "Do you know who this person is?" And I point to the bus. She looks at it. She shakes her head. "No, I don't." And I kind of paused. And I was like, "Ma'am, are you sure?" So then she goes and she peers a little bit closer. And there's a little plaque that doesn't have his name on it, but has one of his more famous sayings, which says in Spanish, "Liberty is in beg for it's conquered by the blade of machete." So she reads that and she guesses Maximo Gomez, the Dominican general who you alluded to a few minutes ago. And I said, "No, it's Antonio Maceo." She said, "Same thing." And then she kind of shrugs and keeps on going. And this is, this is a Cuban woman who I'm assuming, based on age, even if she would have come here in the 1960s, like a lot of Cubans did, she still was, based on her age, was pretty close to adulthood when she left Cuba, and living in Miami all this time. And ironically, Domino Park, which is named after Maximo Gomez now, was originally named Antonio Maceo Park.
So they replaced Maceo with Gomez.
Now, Antonio Maceo was at all times in the chain of command in the hierarchy of the Cuban Revolutionary Army, reporting to Maximo Gomez.
Okay.
Maximo Gomez was very experienced, very skilled strategist and even tactician. But there was a lot of it, I think, centered around the fact that Maximo Gomez was also white, Antonio Maceo was black, and the detractors, the Spanish detractors, the white Cuban Tories, if you will, to borrow from the American independence struggle, they would try to scare white Cubans and even some
into staying loyal because of the threat of Maceo. He was too threatening a figure.
Or what they said, another Haiti. They said this is another Haiti, and this is proof of it. Their best general is a black man. So Antonio Maceo, being very cognizant of that, and also seeing how
allowed himself to play second fiddle.
He did that, knowing that there was a lot of folks that passed him over for promotion specifically because of racism. The Cuban War of Independence stalled at 10 years, largely because of internal strife and a lot of division. There was a lot of provincialism and a lot of things, but there was a lot of division within the ranks, and quite a bit of it was based on matters of race. Essentially, it delayed the birth of an independent Cuban nation much longer than it should have.
Well, strikingly enough, in the past year or so, maybe 2 years or so, we've seen Antonio Maceo's name resurface. Dr. Henry Louis Gates, on his recent series, Africans in Latin America, I believe that's the name.
Black in Latin America.
Black in Latin America, on one of the features in Cuba, spent some time dealing with, why the memory of Antonio Maceo may have been forgotten. It's a lot akin to what you're describing.
It's a great segment. It's not as long as we'd like it to be, but it's longer than other folks would. So I'm very grateful to Dr. Gates.
Nothing, right?
Well, it's a significant part of it because it was widely viewed by people. He interviewed some fantastic. He talked to Ada Ferrer, who's a scholar whose work I've admired for years. Talked to her in Santiago. He interviewed Graciela Chayu, who I'm a big fan of as well. He also talked to Tomás Fernando Robaina, who fantastic historian as well. So Dr. Gates talked to some very significant people. So the fact that he spent, I think it was about 7 minutes of that 1 hour segment on Antonio Maceo, I think is credit to Dr. Gates' own curiosity, because it's somebody that Americans knew about and we've forgotten about. I'll give you an example. Just 2 days ago on Monday, as I was going through online archives, I had to stop at about 10. I was looking through birth records and draft records for Northern Florida among African American and white men, including some of the enlistees that enlisted for service for the United States during World War I. A lot of them were named Maceo.
Naming their kids Maceo.
Including at least one white person, at least one white soldier. And these were guys that were born in the late 1890s. So they were just old enough to fight in France during the First World War. Most were named. Most of the Maceos were African American. There was at least one that was white. Wow. Significant.
Well, this is a fascinating topic. We're taking Antonio Maceo beyond Cuba, the place where the history was made in terms of fighting the Spanish, and now introducing him on a global basis on something much, and we have to do a second. Can you stick around for a second?
Absolutely. Sure.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break here, folks, and we're going to come back and hopefully answer some of your questions